Hello, welcome everybody to When Words Collide, and the name of this panel is Access Denied. I've got a bevy of beautiful brainy babes here, so I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Naomi Davis. I'm a literary agent with Bookends Literary Agency. I represent fiction across age ranges and genres. I work from picture book to adult. Sci-fi and fantasy is my jam. I love it. And I think that if everybody can just give their own introduction, then we'll talk a little bit about what the panel's about. Jenna?
My name's Jenna Greene. I'm a YA fantasy author of the Imagine series and the award-winning novel Reborn, as well as the co-host of Quillin Inc., which is a podcast where we interview authors from around the world. So I guess, Susan, you can introduce yourself next.
Oh, well, thank you. My name is Susan Calder. I've been writing for almost 30 years, and I've experienced all kinds of different rejections. But I have 3 published novels with traditional publishers. 2 are murder mystery, and 1 is a mainstream suspense. And I've also published about 10 short stories in magazines and anthologies, and some of them have won contests. So somebody liked these. Is anybody left?
Holly.
My name's Holly Schofield. I write science fiction short stories. I've published about 80-something short stories to date in places like Analog, Escape Pod, and Lightspeed, and I'm having a lot of fun at it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. I think we want to cover a number of different types of rejection on this panel. So we'd like to kind of work through, stages of a writing career, talking about rejection. And the first thing that we want to get into is, what do you do when you you finish your novel, you've sent it out to your beta readers to read, or you've sent it to a freelance editor to do some polishing, and you receive negative feedback? How do you handle that? What do you do if you disagree with the feedback? All that sort of stuff. So let's just kind of go back in order again with Jenna, Susan, Holly, and talk a little bit about how you have handled, or how you would recommend people handle, negative feedback from editors and beta readers.
I have so much negative feedback to really think through. I think the first thing is to get past that initial gut reaction, that initial gut emotion. Any feedback you get, this is your baby that you've worked on for months or years, and so that initial oh they didn't love it is hard to get past. But if you can put that emotion aside and then think about the critique of it and what could be improved, then it goes a lot better. So just take a moment and have those emotions and deal with them, and then try and progress past them.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. Usually this started for me either in a class critique or in a critique group. So there would maybe be, there could be half a dozen or how many people are there who had made comments on it. And then I'd listen to it in the class, and it is rather overwhelming at first, and you think, oh, this is impossible, I can't really do it. So I often did like to let it gel for a period of time. And then I would bring it home, and in my earlier days, we actually did it mostly on paper and that. So I'd have these blocks of paper of what I had done, and I go through them all. And invariably, it wasn't so terrible once I got down to it, which I think Jenna was talking about. And I could see how I could work with the comments to make what I wanted to get across much better. So I would go through them all and consider them all, and some just really were maybe off base and I couldn't do too much with, but others really did help make it better.
Yeah, I'd agree with both thoughts there. With short stories, you don't get feedback from editors too often. It's coming through a critique group or a critique buddy. And in that case, I'm always so happy to get it, whether it's negative or positive or what, because that's hard to find. That's a valuable thing, to find somebody that's your peer, or hopefully just slightly ahead of you, and giving you critique. And if they can pinpoint what's wrong and you can figure out how to fix it, that's just wonderful. To me, it's a very necessary step in the process, and it's a fun one that I enjoy.
I think it's important to remember that your critique group is only as strong as your critique group is. So they're there does come a time when sometimes people who have been utilizing the same critique partners for a number of years find that they need to branch out and either loop new people into the group or join other groups as well. Because if you find that the feedback you're receiving from your critique partners isn't leveling you up, you know, we do grow as writers and we grow at different speeds and paces. So it's absolutely reasonable to consider different critique partners if you get there. A number of my clients are in some really fantastic critique groups where they really, really support each other and all work to the betterment of their own novels while respecting the integrity of the novel. And I think that's a really special thing. So if you can find that, like, that's golden. Whether the feedback is positive or negative, it at least gives you some insight into how readers will respond to your work. I think that the next thing we can talk about is, you know, you finished your novel, you've done all the revision, you've gone through your critique partners, you're feeling good about it. So it's time to take it out on submission, and you send it out to agents and publishers. And then inevitably the rejections pour in. So, you know, as I'm an agent, I think I'll let the authors speak first and then respond from there. So Jenna, why don't you take it?
I think I'll repeat the mantra that really got me through my first decade of submitting and rejections. Because back then I thought I was great and I had a long way to go, so there was a lot of rejections. But there's a famous quote, it's probably Stephen King, but I couldn't tell you for sure, that says you're not a real writer unless you can cover an entire wall of your room with rejection letters. And that always made me feel good, like, okay, famous authors get rejected, right? The Harry Potter story is infamous that she got rejected by so many people. You're not everyone's cup of tea. It might not be ready yet. It's not fitting the magazine's mandate. There's so many factors that play into it that you just keep plugging along. You add those rejections to your wall, and any strand of hope, you got to have that in your heart, and you cling to it, and you just stay committed to the game.
Yeah, well, I'd say and I agree with that too. And I'd say the first step for me would be to find the publishers who might be interested in what I'm writing, whether it could be a short story or a novel. So that's often through online research. You can just do a Google search with that. You hear of them from other writers that you're talking to. You find them at When Words Collide, perhaps, and work on their pitches. And they'll usually have guidelines about what they want you to send. And so I follow those guidelines pretty religiously, I would say, and they're all a little bit different. So it's actually a lot of work sending them out, I find, you know, to get them right. So that's what I do basically, is send it to maybe a batch at first, and then you know, you wait for the rejection. Once the rejections start coming in, then it's the next batch, and then it's the next batch. And I'm sure for my novels, I probably covered every Canadian publisher and agent I could imagine. And really was, in almost all cases, was down to about the last one, and then something happens. And even along the way, you can get requests for your, you know, if they're a little bit interested, they'll request your manuscript and things. But even there, you know, I think it might be only a 1 in 10 chance we accept it or something. And it's really hopeful, but at the same time, you can't pin your hope on something that might be a possibility. So I just keep going with it and exhaust every avenue. And that was my approach.
Wasn't Clan of the Cave Bear rejected 18 times?
Well, probably, yeah.
Yeah, I think doing this sort of panel is wonderful, because we need to normalize that rejection is a thing. Everybody gets rejection. Almost nobody gets their stories accepted on the first submission. Almost nobody, even professional writers that have been doing it for years. They might pop out their next book or their next story and it does get rejected. That has happened. So normalizing it is important. I started writing when I was 19. I wrote a short story. I sent it off to Asimov's and I got an instant form rejection from Shauna McCarthy. And then I didn't write again for 35 years. So don't be me. Don't do that.
Oh my.
I realized that I had other even markets to submit to. I did not realize it was a normal thing when I was 19. Now in the past 7 years, I've just actually, let's see, I've got 85 stories in print, but I have over 200 if you count reprints. And to get those 200 into print, I just hit my 850th rejection. So I track it on Duotrope. That's one way to track it. That costs money. for a subscription. You can also use, I strongly recommend, the submission grinder at diabolicalplots.com, which you can track your submissions for short stories for free and turn it into a game. It's fun. I put on my gaming hat and I just go for it. It's not a writing process. It's not an imaginative process. It doesn't need to be a boring administrative process. Just consider it a game, watch the statistics, and have a lot of fun with it. And always submit top down. Submit to your dream market first and then work your way down. You don't want to get an acceptance at a lower level and say, oh, I could have sold it to my absolute perfect dream market, but I'll never know.
Is it worth it to get the writer's market? Sorry, just popping in.
I don't use the writer's market because it's more mainstream. I stick with speculative fiction. If you're a speculative fiction writer, Diabolical Plots submission grinder has everything you need right there. For other genres, I can't really say. Maybe somebody else can.
Well, it's the writer's market online, I guess. Is it online?
I don't use it, so I'm not actually sure. I use a combination of Publishers Marketplace and Query Tracker in terms of from a writer perspective. That's where I would get my information.
I think submittable is the best because it will tell you what's coming up. It will tell you when its deadline is. It's all ready formulated.
It may not do novels as much though. For novels, you might have to do
there's a lot of markets it
Canadian speculative fiction, maybe just do a general Google search of the kind of novels. And another thing you can do too is if it's you can research with the kind of novels that have been published that are like yours, and you go in the acknowledgements and you see which agent they're thanking and who's published when, and then you can send in that way.
What was that website? Diabolical?
Diabolicalplots.com/submission grinder, I believe. Close to that anyway. Another place for Canadian short story markets for speculative fiction is the SF Canada website, sfcanada.org. Has a list of the Canadian markets, but of course there's a lot more American ones out there.
I think speaking to something Susan said really resonated with me, which was it only takes one yes. It only takes that one yes. You get that yes and you're done, and that's great. And I think I want to speak to the statistics a little bit from an agent perspective, because I used to explain on panels that I receive about 300 queries a month. That number has gone up. It's like there might be a global pandemic or something and everybody's at home and finishing their novels and shopping them to literary agents. I don't know, but I'm currently receiving between 500 and 700 queries a month. And then of those queries, I typically request 10 to 20, depending on the quality and the genres that I'm really hungry for, the things I'm not selling actively in and want to be selling actively in, or the things that editors are telling me they desperately want to see come across their desks. So 10 to 15 of those 500 to 700 queries are what I will request. Of those 10 to 15, I'm lucky if I find one that is ready for representation and ready for, and in such a shape that I can be a benefit to it. So those are kind of the odds from the agent perspective. And then of course, once I've offered representation to a client, then it's your turn to reject me if you've got multiple agents looking for your stuff, which congratulations. And I love the wait. I love the anxiety. It's fantastic. I deserve it because I send so many rejections. But then of course, once I sign a client and I take that client out on submission to publishers, then there are more rejections. And I see a number of my clients here in the attendees list. Hello, I'm so glad you came. And they certainly know that, the rejections are dozens and dozens that I send along to my clients after they're represented. So you really are, auditioning for the major leagues and then trying to get a home run in the World Series. It is really what you're trying to do in the traditional publishing process. And it's difficult. It really is difficult. Once you have that book deal or that agent or whatever that first goal benchmark is, there are later rejections that come in the process, which I'd like to talk about next, specifically in the form of negative reviews. Negative reviews happen. They're very, very common. You actually don't want there to only be positive reviews on your book because you want to make sure that there are people talking about how the book made them feel. How do you deal with that? How do you handle it when all of a sudden somebody links you to a 1-star review on Goodreads and you go, oh, this is what people are saying about my work? How do you deal with that?
I think I look at it this way. So I'm an English major, English teacher, and I had to read classics. So books that are hundreds of years old that everyone in the world loves, that I hated. Like we're talking Wuthering Heights, we're talking The English Patient that I had to plod through. So when I think about people that don't like my books, I might just not be their cup of tea. It might just be that I'm not their style, but I'm someone else's. And that, maybe this book is only getting 3 stars, but I'm going to get better as a writer. And my next book, I'm going to hope for 4 stars and go from there. But you just have to find, with all these layers of rejections, a thread of hope somewhere. I mean, just to go back to what we were just saying about rejections from agents and things, I got a rejection that made me happy, in that a big literary agent house. They asked to see more than just the initial chapters. They asked to see a big chunk more, but then they ended up rejecting it. But I was able to say, but they wanted more. Like, that was a big thing, because usually agents are just like, no.
We don't ask for it if we don't mean it.
No. Yeah. So sometimes you can say, well, I am getting better, or I am moving along, or someone liked part of it, and I can go with that thread. I can cling to the littlest bit of hope, and that's how authors have to work.
Yeah, Jenna's made a couple. Oh, sorry, did you want to speak? I'll just go on then. Like, Jenna's made a couple of points there that I can pick up on. The one about positive rejections, we talk about that, and you can take heart with things like that. And actually, it reminded me when Holly was speaking before. I think the first short story I sent out, and it was to a good magazine. They replied, we like your writing, but it's not for us. And I was devastated too. I thought that was terrible. And that is actually a good rejection, and the partial, when they at least start showing interest. So there is, you can take heart with things like that. The other point was to this question of the negative reviews. That's also a really good point. And I actually have found that being in a book club has given me a lot of perspective. My club usually reads award-winning novels, and a lot of the time, half the people hate them, or maybe we all hate it. And so it really has helped me with perspective that way. And I should probably admit that my books have received some of those really low star reviews. And but I do feel, despite trying to have perspective, I think that probably hurts the most of all the kinds of rejection, because it's out there for the whole public to see. Whereas your rejection from your critique group, or your beta reader, or your editor, or an agent is just between you and everything. But this is out there. It may never go away on cyberspace. It's also your finished work. You can't really, it can't help you improve. Whereas the other kinds of rejections, maybe, you can take something from them and use them to improve. So it's really kind of a bad one. But I would say that experience of the other kinds of rejections along the way, of the critique group, the agent, the publisher, probably prepares you for that later rejection down the road. It kind of toughens you up. So you really have to go through the whole stages of rejection, sadly.
What I find is a 1-star review, usually there's a comment that shows they didn't get the story, and they just didn't connect with it. And I've had 5-star reviews where they also didn't get the story, and they liked something completely different than what I was trying to get across. And to me, those are just as disappointing as the 1-stars, because you're trying to build a certain level of immersion for the reader, a certain world. And even with the 5-star, you may have failed at some point. So I try and learn and see how they may have misinterpreted, and try and make it a learning situation. Of course, the temptation is to respond to the reviewer and write them a nasty email, which is always tempting. So do that, write up the email, and then delete it without sending. So that's how I handle it, because yes, we do have emotion about these things, and yes, we will be affected by it, and there's no point denying that.
It's good to have those emotional reactions. It's good to really care. It's good to always be ready to grow and change as a writer in response to how people are reacting to your material. And the fact is, if they're not getting the story, and that's happening repeatedly, then at some point you do have to stop and look at, is this something I'm failing to execute that I could execute better or differently? Or is this just the wrong person reading the wrong book? I mean, it's hard to tell, but when you see the same things consistently and you start to see patterns, that's when you can really make changes and work toward, from access denied to access granted. There are other rejections that we could talk about, but I think we'll move along a little bit here. We could talk about rejections on your next book idea from an agent or publisher you're already contracted with. We could talk about poor sales. Publishers sometimes request that their authors rebrand under a pseudonym, because if you don't sell well in one market, then they struggle to get the big stores to pick your name up again. So all of those things are painful and awful, but I think they just fall in line with the rest of the advice that we're going to give. So I think we'll move along to talking about exactly what feedback you receive in a rejection, what is helpful and what is not. And I think before we talk about, specific examples, I want to get it out there that a common thing that I hear as an agent is, if you would just tell me why you rejected my query, then I could fix it. Two problems with that. The first one is 500 to 700 queries a month. I can't do it. I'm sorry. I would love to, but I can't. The second one, though, is that if somebody is only reading a snippet of your writing and they found one thing that they didn't like in it, that is not reflective of a consistent problem in your book that you could fix to get in the door. That is reflective of my subjective reaction, and we all react to media based on our lived experiences and based on our current thought directions and goals for whatever area of the industry we're in. So because reactions are so subjective and queries are so short, it really would be a disservice to authors if we gave specific feedback on a short query letter. So let's talk about, the actual types of feedback we might receive. What might people say that's negative? What might people say that's positive? What's helpful and what's not? And what do you do about that?
Oh, there's just such a big list.
Start with the negatives, and then we'll do the positives.
Well, they're all both. Like, so my Imagine series, they're like, this was back when I first started, and I didn't know anything, and I didn't even know to Google things, and I didn't even know there was such a thing as, like, you're supposed to have minimum word counts and maximum word counts, and maybe a YA novel shouldn't be 180,000 words. Now I know. And they were like, we're going to take it on, but we need to cut the word count or break it into a series. And I want you to change the entire point of view, which basically meant I had to rewrite the book to change it to the point of view. But I mean, it worked out. It made me a better writer. I understood about word counts and point of view and all this wonderful stuff. So, but it can seem very daunting, like, oh my goodness, I have to start rewriting this book from scratch. But for a publisher to take it on knowing it needs all those revisions is just quite flattering in a different way.
It's uncommon, but it's a huge leap of faith, and it's so awesome that they did that for you.
Yeah. And then, you get the edits and you get that page of, like, all red, and you get that moment of pure panic, and you just have to, it goes back to that same rejection where you have to put it aside somehow and then put on your critical thinking hat and see what you can do with it. I tend to agree with my editors and my critiques and things, except for series, because I know what might be happening later in the series. But if you really get into it and take their criticism, and you can learn so much. Now that I'm on book 5 and 6 in my career, things are going so much quicker. My edits are not as scary. My critiques are like either, oh, I knew that, I just forgot it, or just really minor things. So you're always playing that long game and thinking how it's going to help you in the future.
Well, I wouldn't expect a publisher to want to take on my book and suggest a complete overhaul. So that's more than I expect. Yeah, that would be rare. So when I get a critique like that from somebody, it's not really helpful to me, or it's not certainly what I want. I'll think about it, and I suppose if enough people are starting to say that, then eventually I probably would do that, because it could be the right thing for the book. But just one person saying it, just of a critique group or something, I wouldn't want to do that big change unless I felt it was right. So I would say generally the kinds of critiques that are more helpful to me tend to be if somebody zooms in on something specific that I can change, without sort of drastically changing the whole book. But it'll often have ripples through the whole book, and I've got to find them, but that is okay. Now, a particular example I could give is I have a novel in progress, and I gave it to 5 beta readers, friends, and one of them is a retired doctor, and she came back with problems with the medical ethics of a psychologist in my story. And so I was able to make some changes to make my psychologist more ethical to her satisfaction, because I wanted to do that. And so I did that, and I think that makes the book more believable and more acceptable to readers. So that kind of change I find helpful, to me, where it can, where it's something that's a real specific change that I can do.
We touched on the quality of the critique group making a difference before. When I first started out, I didn't have any critique partners, so I went to critters.org, which is a website that anybody can join and post up short stories or bits of novels. And by critiquing other people's work, which of course is a very valuable exercise, then you get several critiques on your work, and you can get terrible critiques. People can just say, well, that sucks. And not anything else, because that gets them a credit towards their own critique count. So I learned at that point that you don't take all the criticism and critique, you cherry pick what you need. So if you're on Critters, you don't take most of what they're saying, but if you move up and join other critique groups and make your buddies at conventions like this and so forth, then of course the quality and the level of advice will change. If you have a professional sale, consider joining Codex Writers, codexwriters.org. I like that wrong, because they have a critique section. They're all professional or neo-pro writers, and they're all pretty much nice people. It's well-moderated forum. You can learn a lot there. It really helped me, Codex Writers. And also consider joining, after your first sale, SF Canada, which also has an online forum as well. It's pretty good too. So work your way up that way. And then when the critiques come in, you know what you're looking for. You can pick out what's valuable advice in keeping true to the story you want to tell. You might get a critique where it's an excellent idea, but it's not the story you want to tell. And take it from there. I know my own flaws, which is one of them being I don't put enough emotion into the prose. Sometimes when the protagonist experiences an event, I'll forget to have a reaction by the protagonist. So I go through and I cherry pick for critiquers who have pointed out where I'm missing a beat there, an emotional beat, and so on. So you use the critiques as a tool. And think of it as a tool, then it's much easier to take it when you see a lot of margin comments coming back on a piece.
It's important to recognize that you do know your own strengths, but sometimes you don't know all of your own strengths, and it's helpful to have critique partners tell you what you're good at, because then you can load your book with what you're good at, and that will really shine and help take the attention off of things that maybe need a little bit more work. For example, some people are great at absolutely beautiful narrative prose, but not so strong at dialogue exchanges. So if you know you're really good at the narrative prose, not only is that something you can draw out in your manuscript, but you can also don't hesitate to be really specific with critique partners and say, hey, listen, I love most of my book, but I hate the dialogue. Help me fix it. And you can assert to critique partners, I do not want to change anything with my plot. I want to, get these character arcs a little bit more stabilized so that, the development is realistic and helps readers suspend disbelief as they go through the speculative story or whatever's going on. It's good to know what you do well, and it's absolutely fine to assert what you do and do not want help with. That's ultimately your call. And if somebody comes back and says, hey, I didn't love the dialogue here, I hated the dialogue, and you think your dialogue is awesome, you're free to just disregard that feedback. It's incredibly important that you remember your book needs to be what you're happy with, and also keep a mind toward the marketability of that book and the marketability of your execution. It's a tough balance to strike, but if you go into any critique situation open-minded in that direction, then you can generally make some progress. So when you receive unhelpful feedback, let's say you sent it to your critique partner and they wrote back something, you know, half a paragraph, and it was not very detailed, and they were like, oh, I kind of like this, but I kind of like this, I kind of didn't like this, and it doesn't give you any direction. How do you respond to that? Do you say anything? What do you say? You definitely don't email agents and publishers who reject you and tell them that they're wrong, but you know, what can you do? What are your next steps when you receive any form of rejection or unhelpful feedback?
I always get rejection or feedback that's like, well, this book was a little juvenile. I'm like, it's a YA book. Like, it's
Juvenile
supposed
fiction.
to be. Yeah. And so you really have to just look at who you've asked. I mean, I use a lot of youth as my beta readers or feedback groups because that's my target audience. And so I can find out from them what their visceral reaction is to a character and what parts they love, so that I make sure I keep those parts, and any parts that they don't like, then that can change. But they honestly don't have a whole lot of meat to the rest of it. Why do you like this part? I don't know. I just did. Right. And so you might have to use, you know, that audience for this critique, and then find a different kind of audience for different levels of critique and things that you want. And just know that going in. And I just love that what Naomi was saying of just, you can say what you want them to really focus on or not. And then you can know what you want from your different groups and from your different critiques.
Well, I would just say that you're not responsible to your critique partner. You don't have to please them. You've just asked them for feedback on your story that you want to use to apply to it. So you can say nothing if you want, or if you feel like engaging in a conversation, because it could become an interesting literary debate if you feel that they are interested in that. You could do that. But really, I just take the information and apply it or not, and they'll only know when the book is published whether all their stuff is used or not. Where I felt very different about it was when I got my first publisher and they assigned an editor. And then I felt that at this point, the book was both my product, if you want to use that word, and the publisher's as well. So I did feel responsible to what the agent told me. And we disagreed on some things. And what I decided to do was pick my battles. And I went along with the things that didn't matter to me, or I didn't think that made the story worse or the writing worse. But a couple of things that were important to me, I argued with her on it, and she let them stay. So that's how I had to, and I just felt that was a different situation because I did feel responsible to other people for the product.
Yeah, I agree with Susan. You do have to pick your battles, definitely, with editors, and you don't want to be pushing back on every little thing. And of course, respecting their house style in a lot of ways too. If you've gotten a bad information from a critique partner, that's a little different. And I tend to look at it in sort of an aggregate way of looking at it, in that if they didn't like something, but they don't know why, and they didn't expand on it, just take that into account. And if 10 other critiquers or 5 other or 2 other critiquers say that, then maybe there is an issue with that particular section, and maybe you do need to look at it, and maybe you can figure out what's wrong. There's the classic phrase that sometimes people can tell you, and they'll be right about what's wrong, but they'll be wrong about how to fix it. And you're probably the only one that knows the exact fix that's going to work there. It may be a plot event 3 chapters earlier and nothing to do with the part that they don't like. So just taking it as an aggregate and seeing if other beta readers feel the same, and take it from there. And that way it's also easier to handle.
I think an important thing to differentiate, well, all right, let me lead into this differently, sorry. Sometimes the best feedback you receive can be the most painful feedback to receive. And sometimes the worst feedback you receive can be the most painful feedback to receive. Now, how do you tell the difference? If you receive feedback from an editor, an agent, a critique partner, whoever, and it really hurts, and you're really destroyed, and oh my God, I can't believe this is what this person is saying about my writing. You have to reflect on why it made you hurt that much in order to determine if it's feedback you need to apply or feedback you don't need to apply. If someone says, I really disliked your main character, and you get angry and you feel angry, and the reason that you feel angry is because you worked really hard on constructing this character and you do not want to have to do it again, then there's some validity to the fact that perhaps you feel so finished with it that you don't feel the need to make it better, even though it really needs to be better. And on the flip side of that, if they said, I really didn't like your character, and they were like, well, and you say why, and they were like, well, I just found her, annoying, and I wanted her to be a little bit more sympathetic. Well, maybe you meant to make her annoying and not sympathetic. So at that point, you can leave that feedback, even if it makes you angry. So kind of reflecting on why you have a certain emotional response to feedback. In general, most of the time I find writers get really upset when any piece of feedback they receive requires them to do a ton of rewriting. That's unfortunate. You still have to figure out, will it be a better book? Ultimately, you want it to sell, you want it to be on bookshelves. So even if it's going to be really hard, sometimes you need to take that on. It's important to temper a thick skin with a willingness to learn and grow in writing, to take some of that feedback and really learn how to apply it and work it into how you design your books. And also to just decide, this one can bounce off. I don't need to take this feedback into myself. I can let this one go. I think we want to move into Q&A fairly quickly here. So I just want to touch with each of the panelists on the idea of how do you avoid rejections? How do you turn a yes or a no into a yes? The question is, how do you turn a no into a yes? When you've been receiving rejections and you need to make progress forward, how do you turn that no into a yes? What can you do?
Oh, you think there's a magic formula? Because there's not. But you were just saying that you have to get a thicker skin, and you do eventually get a thicker skin. And sometimes the big changes, they're not as big as you might think, that you could probably tweak them. And oh my gosh.
Hey, Jenna, let's move to Susan and we can come back to you if things quiet down, okay?
How do I turn a no into a yes? Well, I'm probably not going to turn it in with the same person, right? Like, so if I've sent this book to a publisher, I can't beat them over the head and say, take it. But what I could do is, whatever I'm learning along the way, try to make the book a better book. And hopefully, another publisher down the road will take it. So I'd say, work on improving my skills and the writing and the book or the story that I've written. And hopefully that will at least be helpful to getting a yes down the road, and not just to say, maybe it isn't finished. If I've received some constructive criticism, then maybe it's time to apply it, fix it up, and then maybe someone down the road will like it. And keep trying, I guess, is another thing.
It's all about what's under your control and what's not under your control. So getting a rejection might just mean that the editor had a crappy day and didn't hardly even read your story. And that can happen, right? We're all human, even editors, surprisingly. So what's in your control? With short stories or with novels, it's a matter of your next one. So if you have one story out there circulating around, you pin all your hopes on it and you're devastated when it's rejected, as it probably will be. But if you have 10 stories out there, it doesn't hurt so bad when one comes back. If you've used something like a submission grinder to line up 3 or 4 markets at once, and then it comes back from the first market, you just whip it out to the second market, that reduces the sting too. So do what's within your control. You can control the amount of sting. You can control how many words you're writing and how many stories you're finishing. But you're not necessarily going to control the market. The editor may have just bought a story similar to yours, and even though your story is wonderful or even better, they can't take it because they've already taken that other one. And it's really a numbers game, which is hard to get your head around, but that's what it is. And just keep plugging away. And another concept is revenge. If a top market rejection, this story, and you've just finished off what you think is a better story. Now you can say, ha, take this one, and see what happens.
Yeah,
Success is the best revenge of all.
absolutely. And it's important to recognize that the only thing you can control in this whole industry is your own processes and behavior. So, there are people who, when I've sent them a rejection letter, send me back an email telling me how wrong I am. There are also people who reach out and say, hey, you sent me this rejection. I'm wondering, is it because of this, or that? And every agent will respond to that differently. You are taking a risk when you push back on a rejection from an agent or a publisher, or when you push back just looking for more information. We know you want more information. We only have so much time in the day. I have a client load of 33 right now. That's a lot of people who are counting on me every single day to work on their books, in addition to all of the queries that I want to give my best attention to. So if I'm spending time arguing with somebody, then I'm not giving full attention to your next query or to the next author's query. So it's important to foster your relationships, maintain a willingness to learn and grow, and continue to persevere. Some of the clients that I've signed, I rejected their first and second books, or I rejected their book and asked for it to be rewritten several times before I signed it. Some of my clients have been rejected by every other agent at the agency, and then I saw something in the manuscript and felt like, hey, I have an idea for how we can make this ready to go, and then we sold it right away. So all of the rejections can pile up, but ultimately your good behavior and your willingness to learn and grow and your willingness to persevere are what are going to get your foot in that door. So I think we have about 8 minutes left, and I'd like to move to Q&A if there is any, and if there are not any questions or anything, then we can talk about a couple of other things. But if there are questions, now's the time. Please ask. It's a really great turnout. I'm so happy so many people came. Thank you all for joining us here in this. It's really fantastic that so many of you are working through this process and trying to figure out how to get further along in your careers. The worst thing you can do is give up.
Here's the first one. How would you find critiquers who are in a younger age group, YA or MG, for example?
Jenna, I think you had answered this one in the chat. If you
I
wanted
answered
to
it in the chat, so I'm a little spoiled though, because I'm a teacher, I'm an auntie, I work with youth, and I'm a mom. So I'm a little spoiled, but honestly, kids are everywhere. So hit up you can start by hitting up your kids' friends, your nieces and nephews. But libraries have book clubs, and they would love to read a book for free. I mean, kids are poor. You can hit up Girl Guides, or Boy Scouts. You can hit up 4-H clubs. You can hit up, go to do school visits and access all that. So you just really have to be creative about it, because finding them, you can find them online, but it's a bit different than how you would find an adult critique group. So you just have to be more creative and kind of go to them.
Thank you, Jenna. I think there's 2 questions in the chat. Do you see them there, Jennifer?
Yeah. Martina James says rejection is a personal experience. The more you get, the better it becomes. When is a good time to evaluate the rejections you've received and decide that maybe you should abandon writing? My instant knee-jerk response is never. That's it. Next.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think just, Martina, based on the tone of your question, I think it's important for us to talk about how, your mental health can suffer when all you're receiving is no's, and you just start to feel really down, and you start to feel like, I'm not getting anywhere. Should I quit? Should I give up? What's the magic number for quitting and giving up? I honestly say never. Some of my clients I have signed much later in life than some of my other clients. They've been writing all that time. And ultimately, more than when should you abandon writing, might a more productive direction to think might be, how do you decide you need to take a different direction with your writing? I don't think you should ever abandon writing. But if you are writing in order to become very independently wealthy, I would advise you to buckle in and be prepared to keep your day job. Think about your goals in writing and where you're trying to get, and then actively seek the information on how do I get to this specific goal. And if the information is out there. There's, YouTube channels. The Bookends YouTube channel talks a lot about rejection and a lot about getting your foot in the door. There's the iWriterly YouTube channel. I'll put these in the chat as well. Just keep looking for information because you will get direction.
I'm just going to jump in here and say that sometimes it's just packaging. Sometimes, when you have an emerging voice, you don't know what your packaging is and you haven't found your groove yet. So maybe you just have to find the right package for your voice. We have another question. If you got asked for your full manuscript and then got a critique back that had a lot of great ideas, do you ask the agent to wait for your rewrite or update, or do you send it without updating so you don't lose the opportunity?
I want to read that question again because I'm a little confused about the wording. If you got asked for your full manuscript and then got a critique back that had a lot of, a critique from a different critique partner, not from the agent in question. Mm-hmm. I can only really speak for myself, but I love when I have something sitting in my queue and I'm waiting to read it and the author says, hold on, I need to fix 8 chapters. Can I please resend it to you? Yes, please do. I want to see it in its best form, and I'm not in such a rush to read your manuscript that I am not willing to wait for it. But it is good if you're going to make significant changes. It is good to give agents who are considering a heads up that you're going to do that and let them have the opportunity to ask for the revised manuscript. Because if you're just revising and you don't tell us, then we might read it and go, oh, this is the problem, and reject it, but maybe that's what you're fixing. So for your best opportunity, do reach out and offer the revision and tell them that you're revising. Some will say no.
I'm just going to jump in on going back to the one about abandoning writing. What we haven't really touched on is taking courses and going out to learn the craft of writing. It's not just one thing you have to learn. It's multi-skilled in a lot of different areas, and sure, you can be strong in some and weak in others. So I would recommend to this person, maybe take a course or two, and that way you may find critique buddies in the course, as I have. There's online courses. Kat Rambo offers some courses. There's a lot of things out there that are online, and of course now with COVID, there's even more online, and learning at things like WWC as well. And I think we missed a question way back there. What's the most valuable critique you've received? I would say it's when I started getting personals from one of the top market, personal rejections instead of firm rejections. To me, that was a way of showing that I'd leveled up. And if you get a personal rejection from a very top editor, it may just nail what's wrong with the story, and you may not have a clue how to fix it. That's, to me, had a lot of value there.
My best critique advice is from my editor, where she said, Chekhov's gun, and I didn't know what that meant, so she had to explain it. But Anton Chekhov always said if there was a gun mentioned in a corner of a room, that gun better come into play later. Otherwise, why are you bothering to mention it? You could just cut that out. There's no point to some of that excess stuff. And especially in YA, when we just want to get right to the action, anytime I added a little detail that I thought was like quirky, and she would, instead of saying it's not needed, she would just say CG for Chekhov's gun, and I'd be like, cut, done, right? And that one stayed with me because it was something I learned, and very simple fix.
Well, I'm just going to talk about more recent one. It wouldn't necessarily be my very best, but I have a writer acquaintance friend in Ontario, and she had finished a manuscript, and she contacted me and asked if we would like to exchange novel manuscripts. And so we've been doing that, over the last few months, just exchanging sections. And it's just been so satisfying, both the feedback I think that we both gave each other, and it led us into conversations about writing, both of us exchanging novels. So I think that is more satisfying almost than just giving your manuscript to someone to read and they give you the feedback. This way it goes both ways, and you're both gaining something from the same kind of thing from it. So I found that a really very satisfying experience. So if you can find someone who's written a full novel and wants a full novel critique, and you can both exchange, and we don't even write in exactly the same genre too. So but it still worked, someone you're compatible with. So
that's really exciting.
I did like that experience, and especially during COVID, I guess it gave me some writer contact. We had these, which I would usually get by going to events and things. So It was good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do see that there is a hand up. However, due to the nature of our Zoom conversation, if you have a question, please type it into the chat. We're not switching to the video questions at this time. I think we're almost out of time here. One more thing that I want to just talk about is coming back to the source of your rejections, and coming back to, you know, the rejections that you're receiving, especially if you're feeling particularly down about receiving a lot of rejections. Sometimes it's just not the right person, or it's not the right time. When you go to the bookstore and you look at the bookshelf, you see a bunch of spines, you read a bunch of back covers, and then generally you're going to walk out with one. All of those books were there for you to choose from, and you chose that one for a reason, because it spoke to you in some way. It seemed it was going to satisfy something you were looking for in some way. And acceptances in the publishing industry are exactly the same. Either people are going to pick your book and want to read it, and maybe a lot of them will, or very few will, and it just takes that one person to pick that book off the shelf and read it. So consider the source of your rejections. If somebody is rejecting your science fiction novel, but sometimes they tend to more work on historical fiction, they might just not be wanting science fiction right now. It doesn't necessarily have to do. So make sure you don't internalize absolutely every piece of feedback you receive, because that's not healthy. Mindful how you let these things impact you on a personal level. It's not about you.
It's about the work. It's always about the work.
Yes.
And the market.
And don't wait
and what
35
publishers'
years to
bosses
send out
say.
another submission.
And I can't tell you how often I have editors of publishing houses say, hey, I went to bat for this and I lost. You know, I wanted to acquire this and I lost. So sometimes it's out of the control of the person who's rejecting you too.
And sometimes it's bad luck or bad timing.
All right,
Okay,
are
guys,
we all done?
Any last minute great tip aside from don't take it personally? I like Jonas's words, commit to submit. Yes, you will be rejected.
Don't self-reject.
It's not you. It's it's just something you gotta keep doing. I know for myself that's great advice, and I'm certainly going to take it. And just remember, Clan of the Cave Bear was rejected 18 times.
And all I'll say is, ultimately, I enjoy the writing. It's not really about what other people think of me, or it's the enjoyment of the writing process, and that really got me through getting rejections and waiting for rejections.
I think I got through a lot of rejections just by believing in myself that I could do it, I would do it, and I would get there. And so every rejection, as long as I could still keep that drive and that determination and that hope, then I was good, because it's going to come eventually.
When I receive queries on Query Tracker, it actually tells me how many times the particular person has queried my agency, and I can see how many times they've been trying. But still, my decision whether or not to read more depends on that query, that work, that project. So, you know, you may have been rejected 400 times. Nobody has to know that. You don't have to tell agents or publishers you've been rejected that many times. They just have to like your book.
Stay optimistic.
I'm looking forward to my 1,000th rejection.
I can't believe you count them.
Make a cake that has like a big rubber no red stamp on the frosting, you know?
Yes, and the next page says yes, so keep going. Thank you
so much, Jennifer, for hosting the panel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you guys for letting me help out. I wanted to host because I wanted to see the answers, and we just got to keep going. That's it, you know, and we will see the end of COVID too. This will happen. So thanks, guys. Just a reminder for everyone, this is being recorded, and so it will be available to review as many times as you wish. And thank you all for coming in and watching and taking part in When Words Collide 2020.